Joining us, I'm Rachel Platt, the Director of Community Engagement at the Fraser History Museum. And this is our latest Bridging the Divide program in our series. And this divide, well, it is certainly a challenge, that's for sure, in the toxic political climate that we're occupying right now. When the presidential debate is likened to a dumpster fire or mud wrestling, Houston, we have a problem. It feels more like that we have to choose sides. It's us against them. And social media, well, if you've been on it, you know it's like a war zone. So our program tonight is Why Can't We Talk Anymore? As we approach the general election and continue to find ourselves in racial and civil unrest in Louisville and around the country, the Fraser History Museum is partnering with 104.7 WLOU and 1240 AM WLLV to talk about bridging the divide and if it's even possible in today's climate. And how do we navigate those conversations, or are we destined to live in silos? Ron Jones is the Community Relations Manager with WLOU and WLLV, and he's going to facilitate the questions for us tonight. We're going to save time at the end of the program for you to ask your questions. You can send them in the chat feature during the program. If you're joining us from Facebook Live, put your questions in the comment section. Thank you so much, Ron. We're going to be talking to you in just a little bit, and you're going to be looking at those questions. Thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. And another ongoing community partner in these conversations is Lean Into Louisville. We're going to introduce our panelists in just a moment, but first, I wanted to read a couple of lines from a book by two Kentucky women, Sarah Stewart Holland and Beth Silvers. I don't know how many of our panelists or audience members are familiar with this book. The name of the book is I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. The introduction says this: over the past few years, conversations about politics have felt toxic and hopeless. People we sit in the pew with every Sunday have begun to feel like strangers, and loved ones sitting across our dinner tables, well, they feel like the enemies. So I want to begin this evening with the first of a few questions that we're going to ask our audience. And our first question that we're going to ask is this: is this the most polarized you have seen our country? You'll see the question pop up on your screen. You can answer yes, no, or not sure. The panelists can't vote, but I'm going to be asking that question. So audience members out there, go ahead and answer this question now. I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds, and then we're going to show the results. Is this the most polarized you have ever seen our country? Yes, no, or not sure. Now we're going to bring up the results. 92% of the people in our audience say yes, this is the most polarized they've ever seen our country. 4% say no, 4% aren't sure. That gives you a feel, does it not, for polarization in our country right now. All right, so I'm going to introduce our panelists, and we're going to break that question down. Three lawmakers are joining us tonight. They tend to be known for reaching across the aisle and looking for common ground. They include Senators Julie Raque Adams and Morgan Mcgarvey. Also joining us, State Representative Charles Booker, who has just started that new nonprofit called From the Hood to the Holler, connecting people from all different backgrounds. So we're going to discuss that a little bit later. We have two other panelists joining us tonight as well. Leisa Schulz, who is the Superintendent of Schools with the Archdiocese, with the Catholic schools implementing a program called Civilize It. And finally, we have Chandra Irvin, the Executive Director of the Center for Peace and Spiritual Renewal at Spalding, and has helped lead tough conversations among people with very different views. So she's going to be offering some insight on engaging, how you do that, and strategies for it. Thank you all so much for being here. So I'm going to ask each of you all that same question that we just saw. Is this the most polarized you have seen this country in your lifetime, and why do you think that is? You saw the huge numbers in our audience who say yes. So I'm going to start with you, Senator Julie Raque Adams. Is this the most polarized you've ever seen our country?
Well, you know, as such a young woman, I guess my life experience, though, we were just talking about age a little bit ago, but yeah, I think that the answer, I would have answered it yes, had I been allowed to vote. And, you know, I think there's a lot of dynamics that go into that yes response. You know, sometimes I use the example is that you never tell a doctor how he does his job because you figure he has the experience to do his job or her job. But you tell a politician all the time how to do their job, because that's part of the responsibility of being an elected official, is to listen. And so the other part of that is that I think people like sometimes forget that there's actually a lot of different answers to questions that we are faced with, either in Frankfurt or Metro or even in the federal government. And so it's not that easy to just be a yes or a no. I mean, they're very complex. And so it's up to us to try to explain that complexity and try to come to really an end result that hopefully affects in a positive way a majority of people. And so in the social media dynamic, is really terrible, because some things that you would say over the keyboard is not what you would say to that person face to face. And they call them the keyboard warriors. And we have to be really careful that our words also match what we do when we type on our computers.
And we're going to get to social media a little later in this program, because it can be absolutely eviscerating if you're on social media. Senator Mcgarvey, is this the most polarized you've seen our country?
Yes, it is. And I say that I was actually trying to vote yes on the screen before I saw before you said the panelists couldn't vote. And then of course I tried to pull my finger back really quickly, hoping nobody saw it. So yes, I was glad that the results were what they were, because that's how I would have voted. But I'm sorry for the result.
Why do you think? Why do you think?
The why, I'm not exactly sure. I think there's a lot of different reasons, but I look at it as, Julie said, nobody on this call is particularly old, but you say in our lifetime, when I started kind of coming into my adult life, one of the first things that really big news event when I was an adult was 9/11. And that is a time when the country came together. And then we saw other sort of disasters and calamities, the financial crisis of 2008, where people came together and we passed bipartisan relief on the federal level that got us out of that. And so we saw some big crises happen and people would come together. That's gone now. And I don't know why it has gone exactly and how it turned so quickly. But now you come to another really big crisis, which is the global pandemic. And we saw people come together briefly, but that's gone now.
And you see polarization even over that.
That's right. And so what I say is, even with with 9/11 and with TARP and that sort of things, you had some disagreement, but people were disagreeing on the solutions. They agreed on the problems. And what I see right now is people don't even agree on what's a problem. We see that with the calls for racial justice and equity. We see that with the pandemic. We're seeing that play out right now. And so I'm not sure why that is, why people are retreating into such entrenched silos. It could be social media. It could be other things that have been lingering for a long time. But I see it and I don't like it, because we've got to get back to the point where we can talk to each other. And by talking, we have to listen. We can agree on our problems. We can disagree on the solutions, but ultimately come together and do something about it and move forward. And so, no, I think this is a terribly divisive time.
We're going to talk about strategies coming up. Representative Booker, is this the most polarized you've seen it? And why do you think that is?
I guess sort of to build on my colleague's response from the other chamber, I would vote yes. But my yes has a little bit of nuance to it. Things aren't any more polarized than I would expect them to be based on the things that happen behind the scenes, the things that hit a lot of marginalized communities that don't often get shined, brought to the forefront. I think what we're seeing now across our country, certainly happened here in Louisville as well, is a lot of these structural challenges that have been there are getting put forward and being more pronounced, and are essentially being put in our faces in a much more exacerbated way. And then we have the people that are in the high points of our leadership that are stoking it in ways that I've never seen before. So what it is creating is folks on various sides of the political spectrum that have not been heard in very formal ways, having bigger platforms for better and for worse. I think some of the protesting and demonstration that you're hearing from folks that are crying out, it's not like we just started calling for justice. It's just that more people are listening now. So that's not new. It's just more people are listening. And the same thing with folks that, dwell in white supremacy. It's not like people just started seeing the world through those lenses. It's now they have leadership even at the highest level that gives them a lot of platform. And so as challenging as all of this dysfunction is, it gives us a chance to really grapple with these things and build the common bonds to make our way out of all of the mess, which I know we can do. And I hope we can talk more about that.
We're going to talk about solutions coming up in just a little bit. Leisa Schulz, let's ask you. I don't know if you want to answer that question. Is it the most polarized you've seen it? I want to know what you're seeing with young people and how they're responding to it, since that's really your field of expertise.
Yes, and I would answer yes to that. I certainly think for me and my lifetime, I see it even, more polarized. I think certainly with our students as well, it's not unusual, in schools and classrooms to have discussions about, especially this time of the year when we're looking at presidential elections and other issues. However, what we noticed, I think maybe within the last 4 to 5 years especially, is that, it really entered into playground discussions and recess, where we started to have, students saying and doing things that we really had not experienced before. And so
do you mind giving an example when you say that?
I think,
more toxic than normal, or?
Yes, I think more toxic and more, where you would have, elementary school children saying things that, would be headlines in the newspaper, in social media. And I know our principals and school leaders were concerned about that, because it seemed like, chanting phrases and things like that, by young children was really uncharacteristic of it. And, we were thinking, children, are listening and seeing and hearing, and are they saying things that they've heard, but they're not really understanding exactly the implications of that.
But parroting things perhaps that they heard without full understanding.
Absolutely. And so that, presents, an opportunity to really enter into that and really talk about that, because I think there's so much information and so much out there. And so things are more immediate. And I agree with Representative Booker that in some ways that's very good, because now we have a lot of options and choices and sources of information. Where in the past it might have been limited in terms of what was shared and what was out there. And by the same token, that presents challenges of how do you become more discerning and knowing and understanding, and starting to work with our young people, to really look at that and really recognize what, the inappropriate nature of a lot of what is said and how it's said, and how do we seize that and really use that as an opportunity to enter into that conversation and start to work with our students.
Chandra, let me ask you about the polarization. And if you say it is the most polarized time of your life, you let me know the answer to that first. And then do you see it as opportunity that some folks on this panel are seeing it?
Yes. Well, first of all, I am a child of the Jim Crow era. So I know about divisiveness. But I would say, yes, I agree with the folk on this panel that this is an extraordinary time of divisiveness. And I see it exists for a number of different reasons. One of them is that I think our national leadership has been divisive, and intentionally so. And at the same time, I don't just lay it all at the feet of a person, because there are other people who are involved as well and who help to sustain that type of divisiveness. And then I think another reason is because it seems to me we don't have a common vision right now. We say, for example, that we want liberty and justice for all. But I wonder whether or not we are all on the same page in terms of what does that mean? Who is included in all? Who does liberty and justice for all? What does it look like for us? What does it feel like? Does it feel the same for everyone? What are the norms and the practices that are a nation that is espousing liberty and justice for all? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And then, are our dreams close enough together to say that we have a common vision? I'm not sure about that. And even if they are, I have another question about our either or mindset. And so we tend to go into this space where we believe that, this is a zero-sum game. And so either you're with me or you're not. So we establish these stances where we are on the offense or we're on the defense, and we are just not in the same place anymore. So we have to, and sometimes we want to say we should be one or the other, when really both answers are correct. We just need to figure out how to recognize this as a polarity, where there are two rights and there are potentially two wrongs, and we need to bring these two together. And then I would say, finally, and I think this is really important, that we have lots and lots of contact, and especially with social media, but even without it, we have lots and lots of contact, but without fellowship. And when I'm talking about fellowship, I'm speaking of, that sense that we get when we are interconnected with one another, when we sense that there's a common humanity. We seem to be lacking that. And that climate of genuine kindness, grace that we will extend to each other, and desire for understanding, all of these things, I think, and plus all of the things that other panelists have said, I think all of them contribute to our divisiveness.
Let's talk about that with polarity. So I read an article by Deepak Chopra who said disagreements are a clash of egos. The point cannot be to win or to change another's opinion, but instead disagreements exist as a place to start negotiating. And I thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to know what you all think. I want you all to weigh in on that. Do you agree that disagreements are a place to start negotiating? Representative Booker.
I do in a general sense of it. And I think that is a very wise point that I'm immediately taking myself to the House chambers, where, we can disagree on things and still see the humanity and the perspectives of one another, so that we are able to build out of it. And I've worked in every level of government. I will say, for the majority of my experience with the majority of people, that exists. It's just when it comes into this realm and politics gets woven in and folks go into the corners, it appears and it is presented in much more exacerbated way. But on a lot of issues, there's a whole lot of consensus. I think one of the challenges with that truth, though, because I do think it's true, is the fact that identity and humanity in a basic sense has been weaponized in such a way. I mean, we understand that so much of, not even so much, everything that we do, we touch, we're connected to, is tied to a history of structural racism in our country. What does that look like in terms of our politics, in terms of our engagement with one another? We've gone through ebbs and flows throughout our history where it's become more overt and then more behind the scenes. We're at a place in our history now where it is very, very overt. And, it makes it difficult to argue who's right and who's wrong when the very identity and humanity of someone hangs in the balance. And so again, it's something that we have to grapple with, and we have to be able to see and meet one another where we are, where they are, so that we can work through that. But when it comes down to a law or a policy that would very directly mean that someone else's life will be harmed in a very clear way that is connected specifically to their identity, to what they look like, or the pronoun they use, or the zip code they're in, then, you know, it makes it challenging for some people to be able to step back from what that means and still negotiate. Because I'm not trying to negotiate on just a few people dying versus a lot of people dying, you know. So those are some of the things we grapple with now.
And that's going to be a question that I ask about, are there some things that can't be salvaged? Are there some things that are non-negotiable? So we'll talk about that in just a second. What I would like, if I could get Senators Adams and Mcgarvey, is there an example that you could give where you were able to reach across the aisle and negotiate that you're proud of? Is there a recent example that comes to mind for either of you? Either one?
Sure.
Senator Adams, Mcgarvey?
Sure, I'll take that. And you know, Julie and I actually work together a lot in the state Senate, so probably have a lot of examples. I'm just thinking about one where you talk about a negotiation, because I thought that Representative Booker brought up some good points as a general principle. Yeah, I view disagreement as a negotiation. I think it's important to note it's how that disagreement is presented as well. We're seeing more and more personal attacks as these disagreements. It's very difficult to start any negotiation with a lot of the sort of epithets and hatred and vile that we're seeing, especially if it's from the highest levels in government. It's hard to, you know, start a negotiation there. But I'll give you an example of something where Julie and I worked on. This was a couple of years ago, and it relates to gay marriage, right? Which obviously is a little bit of a hot button issue. But we know what happened in the Supreme Court when the Supreme Court made the decision that everyone in this country can get married. Then we famously had a clerk here in Kentucky who said that no, she wasn't going to give marriage licenses out. So there was a lot of controversy around this here in the state. Well, the Supreme Court made the decision, but then the state legislature has to come in and react to the Supreme Court, not on a political level. Of course, it became political, but just on a policy level. Now that people can get married, our marriage forms were out of date. So we had to change the marriage forms. The original proposal in the Senate was to create separate but equal marriage forms. We've been down the road of separate but equal before. We know it is wrong. We know it doesn't work. But this is one where we started fighting on it. And there was a Republican-Democrat divide, but there was also an urban-rural divide in this fight as well. I want to point out, we can talk about that a little bit. But I started going around and asking people, not in an accusatory way, not in an inflammatory way, why does this matter? What is your thinking behind this? And where by listening and starting off as a negotiation, what I was told by a lot of people is my constituents want either their daughter, it was usually daughter, or they want to be identified as a bride on their wedding application. And so I said, okay, what if we came up with a solution where we just allow the person to choose? So on the marriage form today, what it says is, you know, your name, choose bride, groom, or spouse. Choose bride, groom, or spouse on name number 2. And that way, everyone can be what they want on their marriage form. And at the end of the day, we actually presented that option to the Senate. It passed unanimously, and it became law. I think we saved the state some national embarrassment by going down the 2-form road. And I think we also reached a result that made everybody happy. And so that's kind of an example, I think, where when you reach across the aisle, when you listen to people, you understand where they're coming from, you can get to a better policy.
And Julie, how about you?
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Morgan said. You know, I love working with Morgan because we just get along really well. Sometimes we share the same brain. But I'll tell you, you know, he brought up an interesting point, and that is working across the aisle with the other party. Sometimes it's very important to understand that you have to work within your own party, because even within, you know, our own jerseys, we have rural people, we have urban people. I mean, you know, we just have very diverse caucuses. And so I think that not only is your your tone and your words are very important to how you communicate with the other side, but your tone and your words are very important with how you communicate and bring your own guys and girls along with your way of thinking. And I think that I loved what Chandra said. I mean, I wrote down so many things that she said because they were all so relevant. You know, liberty and justice for all. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What is our common vision? And what's really true is that we're in a state where we really are divided from a rural and urban standpoint. You know, we have some counties in Kentucky that don't have any Black people in them. And so when Morgan and I have these conversations about inequities within our communities, they're like, what do you mean? And so, you know, just this education and this coming along and working within your own party so that you can work with the other party is just really critical as we move forward with this common vision. And I just really liked what she said about working toward that common vision.
We're going to have Chandra weigh in here in just a second and give us some different ways to navigate. Leisa, real fast, in a capsule, if you can, in about a minute and a half, tell us what Civilize It is all about with the Catholic schools.
Yes, Civilize It was a program that began last spring during the Lenten season. Many Catholic dioceses across the country have used it in their parishes as well as in their schools. And it's a mechanism that for both young people as well as adults really commit to really knowing and understanding how to enter into some of those difficult conversations. Because sometimes you may want to do that, but then somebody says something and then you're not quite sure what to do. And so then all of a sudden you withdraw totally. And we certainly don't want that. But Civilize It, is a program that talks about three things. It talks about meeting people and with civility. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you, to really look at that particular aspect of it. It's looking at clarity, making sure that you're well informed, that you're forming yourself, you're, working on building a good conscience, that you're educating yourself on the issues. And most importantly is compassion, and that is treating others with compassion, always honoring the dignity of the individual. So you sign a pledge and you agree that you're going to agree to these things. There are other resources there in terms of prayers and activities and things that students and adults can do over this entire time frame in terms of making sure that we're able to interact and to have those critical conversations, but to do it in an appropriate and civilized way. And so we decided, again, based on our experience, over the last 3, 4, 5 years with our students, that this was a wonderful way, not the only way, but one of many ways that we thought we could bring in and really give our young people kind of the language and the mechanism to really learn and then also practice what it means, because we're about forming and teaching. So I think our schools, are really good places where we learn that, in addition to our families as well as faith communities and, just other communities of which we would be a part.
So much of this conversation is how we bridge this divide. I do have another question that I want to ask the audience, because I think in this time when we're talking about this hyper-polarization, I do want to ask the question, do you think there are relationships that can't be salvaged because of differing points of view? I hear more and more people talking about this. So again, take a look at that question. Do you think there are relationships that cannot be salvaged because of differing points of view? We've talked about social media, how many have blocked or unfriended recently in these types of situations. Audience members, weigh in right now, if you don't mind. Yes, no, or not sure. And then we're going to ask our panelists this question, and then Chandra's going to give us some negotiating tools, how we engage people. Let's take that down and we'll see what the answers are. Do you think there are relationships that cannot be salvaged because of differing points of view? 59% say yes, 14% say no, 28% aren't sure. Chandra, take a look at that. Are you surprised by those results, and what do you think of them?
Well, I tell you, I just think that when we're talking about relationships and whether or not they can be salvaged, I think a lot of people get into this space where they just want to give up and just say, no, Now, I really do think myself that there are sometimes, I've worked with a lot of organizations, individuals, couples, etc., and a lot of work around issues of cultural diversity, etc. I tend to be a person who I believe in the interconnectedness of life, and that we are all related, and I believe in redemption. So my first obligation is towards peace in relationships. However, I do think that there's sometimes we need to check out of relationships. For example, when we fail, we cannot, regardless to how hard we try, we're not able to find a common shared purpose or vision. We may need to just check out, okay, and for a while. And then another reason we may want to check out is because if we're experiencing repeated abuse and trauma and violations of trust, it may be time to check out for a bit. And then thirdly, we may want to check out because there may be temporary practical responses that are necessary. So for example, we may need to check out until we can ourselves be willing to see the humanity in the other person. If we're not willing to see the humanity in the other person, we may need to just step back a bit. If we are unable to establish boundaries for ourselves, and also boundaries so that we are not thinking that we're supposed to take responsibility for somebody else and to change them, we may need to check out. If we are in a position where we want to explore how we can, if we're not able to explore how we're able to work towards a common purpose, step back. And if we're not in a position to maintain a strong sense of self in the relationship, if we've got to become somebody else in order to be sustained in the relationship, it's time to step back. So
right,
I would
go ahead. I'm sorry. I saw Representative Booker shaking his head there a lot. I didn't know if he wanted to add something right there real fast.
Oh, I certainly wasn't intended to cut it off. No, you were laying out wisdom and clarity that is so true. I sort of want to hear you continue. I will just say, since I'm talking now, that at a humanistic level, at just like a core level, I believe every relationship is salvageable. I do think that all of the dynamics that have been laid out are critical to determining the type of investment that needs to be made or should be made to salvage every relationship. And I think there's a lens that we got to sort of filter this question through, considering how divisive things are in society right now. We need folks in positions of leadership, those of us on this panel and beyond, to push harder to do the work of salvaging some of these relationships at a human level across these divides that we have just understood to exist, like the urban and rural dynamics and divides across party lines and these things. We've gotten to such an exacerbated place that if we just accept those divisive dynamics as the norm and as what should be expected, we're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities to build and to heal and to change things. And so I was really just appreciating the wisdom that was being laid out.
Chandra, finish that thought. And then I've got one other question for the audience, because I want to make sure that the audience gets questions to you all too. Your final thoughts on what you were saying about that time when it is time to step back, check out for a while.
Yeah, and well, I was going to come back to the beginning, which is really where Representative Booker was just taking us. And that is that while I think it's sometimes important for us to check out, I also want to emphasize that I don't espouse to the idea of checking people off, you know, as irredeemable or totally worthless. I just think that we have to be careful about that. And so, because, and the reason why I said, my daddy used to say, if you don't want to fall in the gully, don't play on the bank. And so I think that we can get to a place sometimes, there's a tightrope that we're walking where we will the non-existence of another person. And when we start to will the non-existence with such vigor, then we are essentially saying it's okay to kill them. Mm-hmm. Okay, and when we get to that point, then paradoxically, we become who they are. You know, we become evil, we become self-righteous, we become weak, we become lacking in conviction or whatever. And so my answer is yes, sometimes it's good to check out of a relationship. We need to, at least for a while. However, I would be leery of checking people off.
All right, very good. I want to ask one question. This goes back to politics. The third question that I'd like to ask the audience: how would you describe the first presidential debate? Okay, I'm hearing giggles. Informative on the issues. I was okay with the jabs and the debate. Or the third answer, it was a disgrace. So if our audience members would weigh in, how you would describe, I guess, what will be now the first and only presidential debate. Informative, you were okay with it, the jabs and the debate. Or 3, it was a disgrace. I'm going to go through some of our last points a little more quickly because I want to get to questions from the audience for you all. Okay, nobody thought it was informative in our audience. 3% said they were okay with it. 97% of our audience said they thought it was a disgrace. I'd like to hear from our lawmakers, first of all, if you don't mind. Senator Mcgarvey, your thoughts.
I thought it was a complete disgrace. I don't know if disgrace is strong enough for how I viewed it.
Is there another word you would have used on my survey?
Yeah, I just won't say it out loud.
Okay.
So, no, I thought it was terrible. And I thought I mean, do people remember how much of a controversy it was when Al Gore sighed in the middle of a debate? I mean. So
then what has happened that was, you know, and then now this? I mean, right. What is happening?
Well, I mean, you know, Chandra, first of all, never have me speak after Chandra. I want her to always have the last words.
Right.
And she has spoken so beautifully and so eloquently with such wisdom. And she's rightly pointed out, you can't just put this on one person. I might put the presidential debate on one person. And to me, that's Donald Trump.
Julie?
Well, I think sometimes that public servants forget that who they work for. I think that voters deserve better. And I get this question a lot. People are like, oh, do you like the president? Do you dislike the president? What's your view on the president? Are you going to vote for the president? And my answer is always, I can only control what comes out of my mouth. And hopefully the words and the tone that come out of my mouth is the type that others would want to emulate, that my kids would be proud of me, of how I communicate with others. And it's not just me. I mean, I have been given a really incredible responsibility to represent 120,000 people. And it really matters how I conduct myself and what I say and what I do. And I just wish that other people who have been given this opportunity for leadership would view it the same way. And so it's very disappointing for me to try to live that way and see my federal elected representatives not acting or conducting themselves in a way that I feel is respectful to the voters.
And Representative
I'll say
go ahead, Morgan.
I'll vouch for Julie too. She said she represents 120,000 people. She's also a member of Senate Majority Leadership and represents, I think, the entire Commonwealth. And I have, every time I see her speak anywhere it is, no matter what room it is or who the audience is, she does do that. I mean, she is a person who actually walks that walk and talks that talk. So.
And Representative Booker, your thoughts after that debate?
I was hurt. I was embarrassed for our country. Disgrace isn't really a full enough word. I mean, it hurt my spirit, to see the highest level of leadership, and as a young person from, a community that is never, or very rarely, certainly in this day and age, at the table where decisions are made, and I've aspired to be in these spaces because of the idea of being statesmen and stateswomen, helping to build coalitions and seeing the common bonds and like fighting for the change that we all need, like having those aspirations, which I still do have, but certainly not seeing it represented in the presidential debate was just a travesty. And I think we all collectively lost a bit of the essence that we're trying to build in this democracy, and we're going to have to fight to get it back. I do think that it did help to shine a light. I think this whole opportunity, this whole moment we're in, is incumbent on us to understand why we're here so that we can make our way out of this together. And things are as bad as we see them as. There's a reason that hate is so pronounced and so present, but it is not the majority. The majority of folks still understand that we're in this together. We just got to do the work of lifting them up, and not folks like Trump.
Leisa, let's ask you, did you use that as a teachable moment with students after that debate, and how did you handle that?
I was going to say, I would hope that our teachers, would do that, to really look at, did those individuals put into practice those principles and things that we are talking about? I did not watch the debate, so I only had heard, after.
Was that on purpose? You didn't watch it?
I can't quite remember. It could have been I had something that evening, I can't really remember in terms of everything going on, but I did not see it. However, and I think those situations are always, again, teachable moments. And, what were some things that you may have seen that might have gone right with that, or that you could hold up? And what are some things that did not? And what can we use? How can we learn from that? And how can we then know how we can respond differently moving forward?
I'm going to skip around to a few things because I want to, by 10 till, get to questions from Ron, because I see questions already coming in. Representative Booker, real fast, in about 30 seconds to a minute, which I know is a lot, you have seemed to tap into something, though, when you say hood to the holler. Let's talk about your organization. You have seemed to find the common humanity with things. So let's talk about that real fast, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hood to the holler was what I've been talking about this whole time, is how do we see one another? How do we remember the truth that we're family, that we're fighting so many of the same battles? And, one of the things that really hits me to my core when I show up in leadership is the divide amongst urban and rural areas, and how we have just really succumbed to that and just allowed it to be. The truth of the matter is, when you sit down with folks, meet them where they are, we see how much we have in common. And if we do more of that, which is about this civility and humanity, we can build the common bonds to change policies and to change leadership. And I'm trying to be a part of that solution.
And I'm going to skip forward to a picture of you, Senator Adams, when you had written something with some of your fellow lawmakers. And I think Hannah Drake reached out to you. I'm not sure how this came about, wasn't happy with some of the things that were written, and invited you to come down and take a tour of downtown Louisville. And this is your all selfie together. Just briefly, your takeaway from that, because you met someone who said, please come and take a look. What's your takeaway from this encounter that you had with Hannah and you're touring the city?
Well, I will tell you, she really opened my eyes. You know, when I write something, I reread it, and I'm, you know, making sure that it's the right thing. And I didn't phrase it correctly. The way that I made it out in my letter was that somehow syncing the protest with the vandalism that was going on. And it wasn't that. It was the protests were very different than the outside groups and the vandalism that was going on. And I think that that connection, she really wanted me to understand that there was a difference in those two dynamics that were happening within our city. And the truth is, she was absolutely right. There was an absolutely different dynamic than what my words portrayed in my letter. And so it was funny because, you know, we were cruising around downtown, and she's really an extraordinary person. I mean, the words that she uses and the examples and her background, I just had such a wonderful time talking to her. And she was so enlightening. You know, she has very different experiences than I do. And it was really important for me to do that. And it was really important for her to share with me her experiences. And because of it, I'm different. I think differently. I'm using different verbiage when I talk about things. And she really opened up my eyes. And if we could have more of that, you know, just like what Charles said, I mean, that hood to the holler, the conversations, the enlightenment. But to Charles's point also, it doesn't just stop at me understanding what Hannah explained to me. It goes beyond that, and my responsibility now to Hannah and to others is to perform on the legislative level to make some changes. You know, sometimes it's like, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time. I don't know if we're going to have extraordinary change in Frankfurt with the 21 session, but I believe that we have to start picking away at those inequities and those things that we can change, because we have to show people that we're not just talking, we're actually doing the work.
All right, let me just end with this one last picture, and you'll recognize Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia. And this is a picture that brings me a little bit of hope. Two polar opposites, of course, on the Supreme Court. And there it is, but managed to have a very close friendship despite the politics, with a deep respect for each other. So let me give you, I want just some final thoughts. We'll get to those other slides in just a second. We'll just come back to the panel if you don't mind. And let's ask this question. So with each panelist, I want you to take just 30 seconds, and then we're going to get to the questions to the audience. 30 seconds to tell me where you see hope moving forward with bridging the divide and talking to one another. And I'll use that picture as inspiration. You may have your own. Chandra, let's start with you.
Well, I see hope with our youth, and with the determination that they're exemplifying. I see hope with the intergenerational connections that are being made throughout this process. I see hope when we bring our souls and our true selves to the place of reckoning. Whenever I see that happening, when we strip away our roles and all of that and try to look for who's really here, what do I really want? And what is it that you really want? And who are you that I'm talking to? Then I see hope. And I see hope, you know, there have been sessions that we've had at Synergy, and I saw great hope then. It was before COVID, it was before all of the eruptions, but I saw people coming together from their communities. They were having conversations with police officers. They were talking about their concerns about the relationship with police officers and community. They were talking about what they hoped for in the future. They were sharing their experiences. And when they would come into the rooms, they would be skeptical. By the time the session was over, an hour and a half, some of them you couldn't even get out of the room. They were enjoying having the conversation with one another. And just like you described, Julie, I think that, it's that time when you can come together.
And
really
you have those aha moments, right?
Yes,
that Julie talked about. That was an aha moment for her. She will do business differently in the future because of that aha moment in a relationship, that, and I give you such credit both for Hannah. I don't know who reached out to whom, but I'm so glad it happened. And I think it was good for the community to see it as well. That's what we need more of. That's the model moving forward. Leisa, how about you? Your final thoughts with hope?
I think I see hope with children and young people. I see hope in two people connecting, in listening, in finding common ground, in serving and learning about one another. I just remain hopeful and optimistic, and share, many of the same thoughts and aspirations that the other panelists have said as well.
Senator Mcgarvey?
Yeah, again, please have Chandra go last because she always does such a great job.
She brings up the rear and puts us all.
Package it all up for us. No, I see far more hope than despair. And as bad as things seem at times, and whether that's from a global pandemic, whether that is from our leaders in government, and I will say there is plenty of blame to go around, I do see hope in our young people. But I see hope other places too, because look, we're all talking about the fact we don't like this divisiveness. There is agreement on that. And I see this every day in Frankfurt. And I know it's easy to denigrate government and it's easy to talk badly about what people do in office or what another party does. But what I see in Frankfurt are largely 138 citizen legislators who come from across the Commonwealth who want us to be a better place. I see hope that we can continue to work together, and we have made progress on some things. Look, I see hope in all of this, and as divisive as things are right now, I do want people to remember it's not perfect. Perfection isn't us agreeing on everything. We're going to continue to have disagreements. It's getting back to that place where we can come together over those disagreements, as you talked about, Rachel, to view them as a negotiation, as a starting point to explore those differences and make things better.
And with civility and not name
with
calling,
civility,
right?
Absolutely.
And that's where leaders matter. That's where your tone matters, and calling out what isn't right.
That's right.
I mean, are we all in agreement with that? I think
yes. Truth telling is an important component to any reconciliation.
Yep.
And then Julie, and then Charles, and then we'll get right to questions.
No, I mean, I honestly can't say it any better than Morgan did. And that is, I always say I'm the eternal optimist. I'm optimistic about passing legislation. I'm optimistic about, people and their hearts. And so I will continue, hopefully, to exude some optimism. And I think that maybe that can help bring out the best in some people. And I'm always keeping my fingers crossed for that.
And Representative Booker.
Yeah, I said over the weekend with Senator Mcgarvey by my side that I have more hope than I've ever felt in my life, short of being a dad, in the midst of the pain and dysfunction and division we see. And my hope is rooted in my faith, but I see it in all of the people across Kentucky that are speaking up and organizing and pursuing leadership themselves, many of whom have never done it before. They didn't feel like their voices mattered. They didn't think democracy belonged to them. They didn't think they mattered at all. That gives me hope, because we're seeing a lot of people, especially now with all of the things revolving around Breonna Taylor. It's not just Black people saying Breonna Taylor's name. As I was campaigning for Senate, I was in parts of Kentucky where I was the only Black person there. And it would be a crowd of a couple hundred people. I have pictures and videos of some of this incredible, and I call it spiritual experiences, where people were putting their fists in the air and they would tell me, this is the first time I've done it. Am I doing it right? And they were saying that no lives matter until Black lives matter. And they were saying Breonna's name, and they were saying that we need to do more because we're family. That gives me hope. We can meet this moment together if we have the leaders that shine the light and let everybody know it's okay to be vulnerable and to show up in your identity and embrace one another as family. And we're going to meet that moment together. I know we will.
That humanity that we see in each other. Hey, Ron, let's bring you in, if you don't mind. We'll get you to come on in, and you've got a couple questions for us that we want to ask the panelists.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Rich conversation, extremely rich conversation. We're going to go to the very beginning. Common vision was mentioned. How do we come to a common vision when there is not a shared vision seen?
So how do we come to a common vision when we don't have a shared vision?
Right, when there's not a shared vision that is seen.
Anybody want to tackle that one? Is that for anybody in particular, Ron, or just whomever wants to weigh in?
That was just a general.
Anybody want to tackle that one? That is a good question.
I will say, go ahead,
Sam.
Charles. Go ahead, Charles. I'll let you go.
Well, I normally defer to you, but so we'll be civil. We won't keep doing the back and forth. I'll just say that one of the things that I've seen for a fact, and certainly lift up in Hood to the Holler, is identifying common struggle. When you tell your story and you become vulnerable and sort of open up, one, people can begin to trust you because they can tell you're not BSing them. But then you start to see that you're fighting so many of the same battles, and that allows you to begin talking about those common solutions. And so if we can establish like a core set of just things that draw us together as Kentuckians, we can then work together on the solutions. And we don't have to agree on everything to get there, but we will get there.
Morgan, did you have something to add to that?
I agree with Charles largely. I will also say there are some issues that there's going to be bright lines and we might not find agreement. And I think that's okay, as long as we're doing what Charles was talking about. We're sharing those experiences. We're being honest about them. We're listening honestly to the other people and their sincere beliefs. I'll bring this up on this call because this is sort of like, the granddaddy of political issues on divisiveness is abortion. And at the end of the day, there are two very different points of view on the ultimate solution to that. I don't know that you'll ever completely get someone to agree on the common solution there, but I think you can also still understand people's experiences, go into this with open mind and open heart, and listen to people. And even if you don't ultimately agree on one issue, it's understanding that person is not a good or a bad person, but you have respect for them and moving on to the next issue.
I think that's a really good point. Ron, another question?
Yes. Now, actually, this is a question for Representative Booker. It says, working together to agree to disagree. How is that done when one or both sides don't seem to value the other side's views or worth?
Well, that's the work that you have to do first. If we don't see the humanity in one another, then we don't have the foundation to begin with to agree on much of anything. But the truth of the matter is, we have so much in common that if we do actually engage in an authentic way and meet people where they are, we'll find them because they're so present. And I'll tell you the through line that whenever I show up anywhere across Kentucky, it's poverty. Everybody's struggling, or they know somebody, or they're being hit by it, even if they don't know. And so it's possible. It is possible, but we got to see each other as human beings first.
Here's another question from Simon, and this one is to anyone. It says, are there people with whom civil dialogue should not be encouraged? We can respectfully disagree about pizza topics, not about whether children should be snatched from their parents and detained in camps. So is there a time when civil dialogue should not be encouraged?
Is there something so far removed from the table that you can't even engage in conversation because there is no common ground, or basically, is there something that you would just say, there's no discussion on this? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I guess I won't speak to it specifically, but I keep coming back to, in everybody's responses to this, is that leadership plays such a key component in how we move forward. Leadership, I mean, if you look at the leadership of Matt Bevin, it was very divisive, and we didn't really make a lot of progress. Meanwhile, we were in a state of economic boom. We were creating a lot of jobs. We had good revenues coming into the state, but we didn't make much progress because the leadership wasn't there. And so as we move forward on, you know, really critical social issues and really critical economic issues, that leadership component matters so much. We have to talk better and listen more than sometimes with the people who have had those roles in the past.
Chandra,
So-
what would you say to that question, just out of curiosity?
Well, you know, I was speaking to it a little bit earlier. I guess the way I really think about this is this. Often when we are trying to come up with solutions, we take a very transactional approach. We focus on how can we establish remedies, social, what I call social remedies. And what we have failed to do is to think about what are how do we address the internal readiness or the transformation that needs to happen within self. I draw on the wisdom of Howard Thurman, who says that when we try to get to social transformation, we first have to be inwardly liberated. And before we can be inwardly liberated, and the way we get there is to be personally, spiritually renewed. There's certain types of questions we've got to ask ourselves that will help us to get to a place where we will say, I don't agree with what you're doing. I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'm going to stand here for a bit, at least to try to see where I can find some commonality, where I can find the humanity in you. Because if I can't find it in you, then something also is missing in me. And so it takes time. And we're used to trying to get to these solutions really quickly. And I'll tell you, I'm old enough and I've been through enough stuff, like I'm ready to hurry up and get to some solutions, right? But sometimes I think it's imperative that we just step back and remember, and this is something that King reminded us of, Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us of, is that we're in a chapter, one chapter in a long epic book. And so what we are doing with this one person who we may not be able to agree with, that's just a little bit in that larger chapter and book. So we need to just kind of, I think, give each other grace, because if we want grace. And then, you know, like I said earlier, sometimes we do just need to step back out of the relationship for a bit.
I love
Rachel,
that. I'm going to
can I-
remember what you said, that I'm going to check out, but not check you off. I'm going to remember that. Morgan, what were you going to say? And then we'll take one more question, Ron.
Yeah, and I said I wouldn't speak after Chandra, and here I go. But I'm gonna take a totally different tact, because I could not add on to what she said. So I want to go back to what Julie said a little bit, since we work together in the Senate. I do agree with Julie, but to go to Ron's question, I just want to use this maybe as a point. If I ramble, I'm sorry, just one of you guys cut me off. But he asked a question. He said, you know, what if you're not civil? He was asking about the children that were removed from their parents at the border. And we all probably saw that story in the New York Times this week. And I want to say this, being honest is not being uncivil, right? And so I think if you're honest about an issue, that's okay. And I say that, you know, because we're sitting here in Louisville, Kentucky. I married someone, actually probably hear a child at the door right now, but who's grabbing her. I married someone who's grabbing my child away from the door. I married a woman who's Midwestern, and I just love her to death, but she is direct. And I know there's a debate about whether Louisville is a Midwestern or a Southern city. And this way, I think we're Southern. And so I'll give you an example. We've just been married and I was starting a job somewhere and they had a softball team. It was kind of one of those mandatory fun things where you need to go out. And I remember telling her, oh, the game tonight is at 6 if you want to come. Well, she didn't come, right? Because why would she want to go see some group of lawyers play softball? And so I get home and I said, where were you? And she said, you didn't invite me. I said, yes, I did, right? Because here we talk nice. Right? That's what we do. We talk nice. You can be honest and not have it be mean. It's if you add something at the beginning, usually starting with you're a blank and you are doing this, right? And fill in those blanks, then it's a lot different than saying this is a problem and it is wrong. And so I think that goes into the discourse of how you talk about things. But honesty, to the question asked, honesty is not being rude. It's what you add before and after.
Good point. All right, Ron, one more.
Yes. Do you think Louisville is more polarized, segregated than other cities? I moved here years ago, and was surprised how separate the lives of people from various parts of the city are. Example, East End versus West End, Black versus white. Housing segregating patterns seem worse to me than in many other places than I have lived before. I'm just curious, do you see the same thing?
Anybody want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I do. I mean, by a lot of indicators, we've known historically that Louisville has been, one of the more segregated cities in the country. So I absolutely do. But I also see a growing desire to change that. One of the things I've seen with Louisville is that we've seemed to be comfortable with the way things have been. Even while we're frustrated, it seems like there's been a spirit of acceptance. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that is going away and people are pushing back to say, no, we're not going to allow things to stay this way for generation after generation. So, yeah, but whoever asked that question, they had already answered it, and I agree with them.
All right, Ron, thank you so much. And I want to thank our panelists. And I guess in this time of transformation and discord and divisiveness, that I hope the one thing we recognize is that we're past the point of no return where we can't go back and do things the way we used to do them, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so we're at a turning point and it's just what we do moving forward. I'm going to let people know we want to thank our panelists, obviously, for being part of this conversation. And I think we've got a graphic with our community partners. We want to bring that up, 104.7 FM, WLOU, and WLLV 1240 AM. And thank you to Ron Jones, and thank you to Lean and to Louisville as well. Our next program from the Fraser will be in celebration of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and our exhibit, What is a Vote Worth? Suffrage Then and Now. We are going to highlight women who have served in the military, a great panel of women ready to share their stories and experiences on November 10th. We hope you will join us right before Veterans Day. If you would like to donate to the Fraser Museum, you can do so at frasermuseum.org/donate. We had mentioned our exhibit, What is a Vote Worth? Women fought for more than 70 years for that vote, women of color even longer. Whatever you do, vote on November 3rd. We started seeing a lot of people at the polls today for early voting. This is the end of the official program. I always tell our participants they can hang on if they want, because this is where we kind of had an after party on the last one. And I let the panelists ask if they had any questions for each other. And honestly, it was fascinating. So do you all on the panel have a question that you'd like to ask each other by any chance, that one I didn't get to? Social media is one thing I had to cut out a little bit. I don't know. Raise your hand if you've recently unfriended someone on social media. Am I the only one? Okay, I've never blocked anyone, but I have unfriended recently. So tell me, I mean, your thoughts on that. Do you all not do that? Am I like, I finally couldn't take it anymore? Chandra, am I awful? I checked out, I guess, or checked.
I don't think you're awful. I don't think you're awful. I think, sometimes people use social media. Some people use it for very good purposes. And I really appreciate that. My husband's one of those people. However, you know, social media is a place also where there's a lot of damage done. And I tend to be a very light social media user. And so that's why I haven't unfriended anybody. I probably haven't been paying attention to what they've been saying.
See, I think that's your secret. You have this calm presence. It's because you're not on social media. That's the secret. All right, what about our panelists? Who has questions for each other? Anybody? I guess Morgan and Julie, when did you all recognize this synergy between each other? Because you kind of said we kind of have the same brains. You're in different parties. So when did that come where you went, you know what? We can do a lot together here.
I mean, I'll take that. But, you know, when Morgan got into leadership, you were in leadership before I was, weren't you? Or did we get into the
same year? Yeah, same time.
So I think that we were like, if we're ever going to like move the needle on Louisville, we have to actually be nice to each other. And he actually has a personality that's pretty good. And so, and we had like some really funny jokes and we like each other a lot. And so we literally have these conversations where, okay, I don't know if you can go for this, but can you go for this? I mean, they're just very real. And I'll say, I think I can do this. Let me work on this. And he does the same thing with me. And we give each other heads up about what's coming. And he's just really an honest broker. And I just appreciate that. And I am so grateful for his leadership in the Senate and what he does for Louisville.
Well, Julie, that is kind. Of course, you know, I think you're pretty okay.
All right, this is like siblings, right?
Well, and I'll say this.
I'm enjoying it.
I say, Charles, you can speak up to this too. I will say, when we're in session in Frankfurt, you said it's like siblings. It is like family because we are spending way more time with the people we work with than we are even with our own families during those couple of months. And it's an intense experience. And Julie, Julie has a great sense of humor, which I think really helps anybody in politics. Not to take this back to the presidential level, but one thing you don't see is a sense of humor right now coming out of the White House. And I think that's so important for any politician or leader to have that sense of humor. Julie's got a great sense of humor. She's fun to work with. And she said something that I appreciate you saying that, but Julie, I would say that you're an honest broker. And I think that really makes a difference when you're talking to somebody, because if Julie tells me that she thinks she can get something done, I can take it to the bank. And I know she's going to try. If she tells me it's not going to happen, then that's also good, right? Because she's not leading me on, right? You know where you stand. And so I think that's a really important quality. And that honesty is how you build trust. I know that Julie and I are not going to see eye to eye on every issue, and we don't, but that's okay, because I trust that what I tell her, she's going to keep in confidence, and that she's going to tell me the truth. And so we're able to work together and try to move the needle, like she said.
A couple comments. I don't know if you all, excellent discussion. Thank you. Great session. This meeting, listening to this panel gives me hope. And I think hope right now, there are days, I don't know about you all, when I go to bed, I'm tired going, I don't see much hope. And that scares me. And that's why, Charles, when I heard you speak the other day at Tyler Park, you said, I see more hope than I never have. And I thought, okay, what is wrong with my vision? What am I not seeing? Because that I don't always feel that way. And I was kind of surprised when you said that.
Yeah, well, a lot of, again, my hope is rooted in my faith too. And it gives you a lens of being able to see the world through the possibilities and not the obstacles. And so whenever there's a challenge, I just naturally see a chance to do something great. And this is a very incredible time to do something very, very great because of the height of the tension. So, but no, I'm exhausted too. It's heavy on me. I break down from time to time, but I keep getting reaffirmed, and knowing folks like Morgan and Julie, and I'll tell you from my side in the legislature, everybody that's there is my family. I don't care how they agree or disagree with me on an issue. When I see them, I see somebody that I love deeply. And you got a sense of a bond of we're all in this fight to uplift Kentucky, and we tussle through it. I'm seeing that in this sense of community that's growing, where we're becoming more connected in a lot of ways than we have in a long time, as divided as things are. So it's hard not to have hope. I mean, you know, we could give in to the narrative that we're seeing now, but there are so many reasons to keep fighting. And if we just embrace that, we'll keep pushing.
I love to hear that. Ron, your final thoughts. Then I've got one thing that somebody wrote, and Julie, I want to ask you about that quickly. Ron?
Yes, I just wanted to say, I think in dealing with younger people, and you know, I was looking at Charles, because Charles is a little bit younger than I am. When we're looking at and talking to younger people, they seem to be energized. They seem to be passionate about what it is now that they're doing. And there is hope there when you're looking at the millennial generation, especially, I mean, when I look at them from my generation, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. They are so much more advanced in what they're doing now than what we have done in the past. So that does give us hope, and that does give us an anticipation of greatness to come from this.
Good point. Good point. And Julie, somebody wrote this. They wanted to know, have you written an article regarding the downtown experience? You said it changed you, and I would like to gain some of the understanding that you obtained through that experience. Have you and Hannah thought about writing about that experience or doing anything together about it? I will say in our town at this time, I think it could be a really healthy and positive conversation that people saw, wow, they came together. No, I mean that sincerely.
Yeah. And, you know, and like I said, I think she's an extraordinary person, and we still text back and forth. She's, you know, will give me recommendations of books to read that can kind of open up, you know, my mind a little bit to the Black experience. And I've texted her before and I said, hey, I'm thinking about writing an op-ed. Let me run a few things past you. And when that happened, like things were moving so quickly that as soon as I thought maybe what my point was, then a new dynamic would happen, and then a new dynamic would happen. And to be honest, it's my fault I haven't followed up on that, because it was such a dynamic unfolding situation. And so I think, to your point, it still should be on the table. I think that that should be something that I follow up with her on. And you know, she's really cool, because I was telling her, I said, you know, I've been looking up a lot of the things that you have written, and I want to, you know, read what you've done. And she said, did it make you uncomfortable? And I said, yeah, it made me really uncomfortable. And she said, good. She said,
I knew she'd say that.
yeah. She said, it's hard to read. And she said, but I'm really glad that you're trying to slog through that, because, you know, she said, it's, I want you to think about those things that I've experienced. So she's just, she's an extraordinary woman. I've just been very grateful to get to know her.
And I think a lot of people will feel like we all need to be getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's really kind of the new norm, right?
That's right.
That means we're growing. That means we're in places we haven't been, and hopefully we're expanding. Would everybody agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, Chandra, I'm giving you the final word, then we're going to check out. But just moving forward, since you're able to sum things up so perfectly, give me your best 15 to 30 seconds as we leave in Reason for Hope.
First of all, I want to say thanks to each one of you. It has been a delight to be with you, and you're a very distinguished panel. And of course, Rachel, I have utmost respect for you as well. And so thanks to all of you, and thanks, Ron. What I would say is that, well, okay, so here I am. I'm a minister, so here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to request that you be kept by the divine, that the light and countenance that gives us all insight, meaning into our own purpose as individuals, but also our purpose as a unit, as a collective, as a human race. May that light shine within you continually as it has been, May it never be blown out. And may you find peace, even in the places where there's a lot of disruption. And may you disrupt sometimes where there is peace, so that we can continue to grow together. I want to say that you all have encouraged me tonight, each one of you, all of your stories, from stories about the youth to stories about what's going on in the chambers to, just all of this has really been a blessing to me. So thank you very much, and Godspeed.
I think that's an amen to end this one on. Thank you all so much. It's been a delight. And Charles, we see part of your family there.
Yeah, it was inevitable. She got a costume on.
Oh, cute.
Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your conversation and us leaving with hope. And Ron, I hope we partner again.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
y'all.
Leisa.
Thank you, Mr.
Take
Ron.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Uh-huh.